Well, today's topic is integrated pest management. And of all the things that we've talked about this semester, this may be the most important thing that we discuss. At least it's probably the one that you will use most often. So this week I want to slow down and I want to take a little time for us to work through this. You are supposed to create a IPM plan in your assignment this week. So I want to make sure that you get this. But IPM is really, really important. And if you're not familiar with IPM, that stands for Integrated Pest Management System or Integrated Pest Management. And so you may be asking yourself, why is IPM so important? Well, it's important because if we continue to spray the same chemicals, even if you were to spray a chemical as it is labeled, but that's all you ever sprayed, then your crops would eventually see damage because the insects themselves would build up a resistance to that pesticide. So we have to be sure that we have something in place so that we don't encourage a genetic resistance of insects. And if we have a genetic resistance, then we also will have an increased need. But our needs for chemicals can increase even if it's not due to genetic resistance. There are some things that you can do in a greenhouse to prevent disease outbreaks or to prevent these insect infestations. And if you can do those things before you need chemicals, then you can help keep the amount of chemicals that you need to a minimum. In 1971, the U.S. government became involved in efforts to advance IPM. And in doing that, they established three basic fundamentals. One, improving the economic benefits related to the adoption of IPM practices. Two, reducing potential human health risk from pests and the use of pest management practices. And three, reducing unreasonable adverse environmental effects from pests and the use of pest management practices. So even the government recognized that there was a need for us to do something different when it comes to chemical pesticides. So this process of IPM was developed. There are 6 strategies or 6 steps to IPM. First of all, you have to identify the pest. You need to know what pest you're dealing with. If you misidentify the pest, you may be spraying a costly chemical pesticide and it may not help you at all because the pesticide you apply may not kill the pest you actually have. You also need to know the life cycle of the pest. Although some chemical pesticides will kill bugs at a certain point in their life, they won't kill them at all stages of their life. Some bugs have waxy coating early on, some bugs have waxy coating later in their life, and those waxy coatings serve as a protectant. So you need to know what is the life cycle of that insect so you apply the appropriate insecticide or pesticide. Third, you should establish an action threshold. This is the point at where you have to take action. Having a few little caterpillars might not cause harm, but having a lot of caterpillars will cause harm, and you need to know at what level do you have to take action and use chemical pesticides. 4, you need to develop a management plan, and you're going to do that this week. You need to know what are the steps that your greenhouse will take to help control, prevent, and reduce the amount of insect damage that you have. 5, you implement the plan. During implementation, make sure that you keep adequate records so that in future years you'll know what did and didn't work. And then 6, you go back and evaluate to see how well your plan and your methods of action worked. Prevention is the most important part of IPM. If we can keep a greenhouse from becoming infested with some kind of pest, that's what we want to do. If you're talking about plant materials, you want to avoid older varieties. Instead, you want to order resistant varieties and quarantine all new plants. And by older varieties, I'm talking about those plants that you've kept in your greenhouse that maybe are getting old. It may be better for you to buy new plants to take cuttings from than to continue to use the same old one. Greenhouse sanitation. You want to be sure that you remove weeds, you want to eliminate drainage problems, and you don't want to keep pet plants again, and that can be those old plants that I was talking about, or any plant that you just keep around because you like it, because it can harbor insects. Insect screening can be used around openings such as vents. These screens have small holes that are too small for insects to get through, but are large enough for air to pass through. And then finally, you want to avoid the color yellow. Insects are attracted to yellow, and if your employees have yellow shirts as they walk from greenhouse to greenhouse, insects are most likely going to land on those shirts, or if you have yellow aprons, insects are likely to land on those, and then as you go from greenhouse to greenhouse, you'll just spread that disease around or that insect around. In IPM, we scout and monitor what is in a greenhouse. When you scout your greenhouse, you want to examine plants for pests. Every week you want to keep a weekly scout record. This semester you should have been keeping a weekly lab report. In that lab report, under observations, if you noticed any pests to your plants, that's where you would have written that down. And then you can also put out sticky cards. These sticky cards are usually yellow, sometimes they're blue, depending on what insect you're trying to check for. And you can put those sticky cards out, and each week you can check those to see how many plants have stuck to, or how many bugs have stuck to those sticky cards. If you do decide to use sticky cards, you want to put those sticky cards an inch or two above the plant canopy, and you want to have one card per every 1,000 square feet, and you want that card to be perpendicular to airflow so that as bugs or insects fly through the greenhouse, they will make contact with that sticky card. As you scout the greenhouse, you want to make sure that you are familiar with pests that have been a problem previously. That way you can keep an eye out, and as soon as those pests show up, you can start to take action. Again, you want to know what your best scouting strategies are. What color cards if you're going to use sticky cards. White flies like yellow cards. Thrips like blue card. You want to know where on the leaf each type of insect was most likely to occur. So as you inspect the plant, if you look on the bottom of the leaf, you'll probably be looking for white flies and aphids. On top of the leaf, you may be looking for thrips, leaf miners, or spider mites. Tapping is the process where you take a white sheet of paper, put it under the leaf, and just tap the leaf and see what falls off. This is a good way to find thrips. And then you want to look at the debris in the pot. You want to make sure that there isn't debris in the pot. If you see it, you want to remove it. But if there is debris, you want to look for fungal infections, shore flies, or fungus gnats because they're likely to occur there. There are some things that will let you know that insects are present without you having to see the insects themselves. For instance, things such as white flies, aphids, mealybugs, scales, they all excrete a honeydew, and when you see that honeydew, which is just a sticky substance on your leaf, you'll know you need to start looking for these insects. If you see webs, you're probably going to find spider mites, but you might also see mealybugs as well. And then if you see a white cottony mass, which is really small but kind of looks like white cotton, that's probably a good indication that you have mealybugs. Every day you need to have someone, or you yourself need to scout your greenhouse. And this doesn't mean to walk down the center aisle and just glance. It means that you need to walk past all the plants in your greenhouse and randomly select plants to scout to make sure that you catch any infestation or any presence of insects when they first start. There are some cultural practices that you can do to help prevent the presence of insects. First of all, you don't want to water late in the day. Watering late in the day allows water to stay in the pots longer, and that increases the chance of a fungal problem. You don't want to overwater because, again, you're increasing the chances that you'll get a fungal problem or even shore flies and fungus gnats. But underwatering causes your plants not to be as healthy, and that's also setting up an environment that spider mites really like. You definitely do not want to let your plants sit in water. If you have overhead leaks in the greenhouse, you want to stop these. You don't want to over-fertilize. Over-fertilization causes too much lush green growth, and in this case it's just more of a place for your insects to come to. It's more leaf foliage for them to hide under, so you don't want to over-fertilize. Keeping plants evenly spaced will allow them to ventilate better, and this will decrease the likelihood of spreading a fungal spore. And finally, you want to check your ventilation or heat at night, and that way you can help to reduce the amount of humidity. So you want to make sure that your ventilation is working correctly, or you want to reduce the heat at night to make sure that you don't get a lot of humidity or condensation in your greenhouse. Earlier I mentioned the economic threshold, but just by definition, this is the point where insect damage is considered economically unfavorable. If you decide that you do have to take action and you're trying to avoid chemicals, you can use biological pest control. This is using one living organism to get rid of another. There are different types of these. One is predators. Those are biological insects that eat the harmful insects. There are parasitic predators. They lay eggs on the pest. That is not a pleasant thing for me to think about, but parasites actually lay their eggs on or sometimes in the other pest, and when that egg hatches out, it'll kill the pest. Microorganisms can be used to directly attack the pest or compete with the pest for living space and nutrients. Sometimes you may want to use microorganisms to help with, let's say, fungus gnats and shore flies. That's kind of a common process there. We use parasitic nematodes. And in using these biological pest controls, there are two words that you need to know: inoculative and inundative. Inoculative is whenever we maintain a beneficial population of beneficial pests. If you don't have enough of the pest problem, then the beneficial insects don't have anything to eat upon or to parasite upon, if you will, and that population will decrease. The other word is inundative, which means that you release a high number of beneficials on a given schedule. So you're probably going to do one or the other. You're either going to try to maintain an inoculative number of biological insects, or you're going to just do inundative and say every month release a high number, let them just attack the pest, and then the next month release that same number and just keep that number low. So just think of it as inoculative, you're trying to maintain a biologically beneficial population, and when inundative, you're just going to flood it every so often on a schedule. There are 10 commandments of IPM. I'm not going to take your time and read each of these to you. I know that each of you are capable of reading on your own time. And if you need to pause this presentation and you want to read them now, then that's okay. But there are things that you should always do, and I do want to emphasize there on number 4, you should keep good records, and you should also keep in mind that you are looking at an entire growing system, not just the specific pest. Then finally, if you look at page 9 of this chapter, you will see a scouting guide, how to and where to scout for insects. And as you do your scouting this week as part of your assignment, be sure that you take this table with you and that you look in the appropriate places for each of these insects and that you record anything that you find.